Hi guys, welcome to Miss Barrett-Brown's Ancient History class online. So this is our second installment. Today we're going to look at aspects of Mycenaean architecture, and we're also going to look at the citadels. So the three citadels that the syllabus expects you to know are Pylos, Tiryns and Mycenae. Accompanying this video is a PowerPoint, which I've emailed all of you individually. What I want you to do is I want you to access that PowerPoint through your laptops. It's up to the teacher how it's going to work out, but I want you to go through it. You don't need to listen to it, so you just need to watch it online. I want you to take down all the notes in that PowerPoint. With those notes, you'll be able to answer pretty much any question you get on what is the role of the citadels. And so usually there are 3 to a 5 mark question, and the questions are: what role does the citadel play in Mycenaean society, or describe the citadels? So, as I said, the PowerPoint will give you most of that information. I'm just going to go through a few aspects of the citadels that I really want you to know about, that I'm reinforcing through this discussion. So first of all, the centre of each citadel is a palace complex, and we believe that the Wanaks resided in this palace. And the centre of the palace complex is a structure which is called the megaron. Here, I've written a little note for you. Now that's back the front because of the way this works, but it's M-E-G-A-R-O-N. Please write that down. The megaron is a 3-roomed structure. In fact, it becomes the precursor to the temples you see in classical Greek society. So if you looked at, say, the Parthenon, it is the structure of a megaron. So here's another one of my little diagrams. It's hard to see. Okay, 3 separate rooms. The largest room is the throne room. You'll notice in the throne room, on the right-hand side, I want you to find a picture of this online and draw it for yourself. On the right-hand side is the throne with the libation channels that we talked about. In the centre of the throne room is a hearth. The hearth is a fire pit. It's the one in Pylos, for example, it's quite large, and it's it's plastered all the way around, and it was actually painted with a design of yellow and red flames, and we know that those flames were constantly repainted, so that this was the heart of the megaron. The hearth has some mystical thing for the Mycenaeans and some other early cultures. We're just not sure what. Around the hearth you will always find 4 pillars, and that is constant throughout Tiryns, Mycenae, Pylos. Now these pillars held up the balcony because this was a 2-storied structure. Above the hearth was an opening in the ceiling, and then there was a 2nd story that ran like a balcony all the way around this room. This room is called the vestibule. There it is, spelt down here. The vestibule was, like we think, a preparation room. For example, in Pylos, this room was decorated with frescoes of a procession, which again links to our idea that the feasting that went on in the megaron was of a religious, or certainly significant political form, and that the preparation that went on in the megaron, in the vestibule, where there, as I said, was an altar, and there was these processional frescoes, was like a indication of what would happen inside the central hall of the megaron itself. And the first part of the structure is this outside area. It's sort of open air, would have had a roof, and there were always 2 columns there. Okay. The other thing about the Mycenaean palaces that we know is that the floors were plastered and painted, usually in great big squares, vibrant bright colours. Some of the squares were painted to look like stone, but others had particular images on them. So for example, I think it's in Mycenae, there was an image of an octopus as one of the squares that was painted in the central hearth area. The walls would have been brightly painted. The columns which are at the front entrance, and the 4 columns that were surrounding the hearth were the same kind of columns that we had in Gnosis. They were wider at the top and narrow at the bottom. They tapered in, and again they were painted and they were wooden. Okay, so that's what the megaron looks like, and we find a megaron at the center of every palace complex in Mycenaean Greece, except for Knossos. And that's because the Knossos palace was actually an old Minoan palace that was then adapted by the Mycenaeans. There were some frescoes that were Mycenaean frescoes, and there were also other earlier frescoes that were Minoan. There are other things about the palace that are really important. For example, if you looked at the palace complex as well as the central megaron, off the central megaron there were various storerooms. And as I said in Pylos, and it's really important to notice, that right next to the central hall was a room in which there were thousands of feasting cups, which is indicative that one of the central functions of the megaron was large gatherings in which there was feasting and drinking, perhaps of a religious nature. As well, in some of the palace complexes, we've found a second hearth area that smaller. It may have been for the Laurigedders. It may have been, some people said, for the Queen.
Hey class!
That's my daughter. Again, it was decorated with frescoes. There were frescoes throughout. We also notice that, we've seen this in Pylos, that around the palace was a series of workshops. So these workshops, remember we've talked about that there was a centrally based economy in Mycenaean culture, that the Wallachs had control over certain products, olive oil, perfume making, textile design. So all those products were sent to the central palace complex and then transformed. So, for example, olive oil became the base of making perfumes, or alternatively, the woolen and the flax was turned into textiles. And from the palace, they were redistributed, or they were imported, or they were exported. In order to facilitate this, there are a number of workshops around the palace. So in Knossos, we've found thousands of looms that indicated there was textile production going on in the palace. In Pylos, we've found a workshop where it was like a workshop to repair chariots. Chariots were important for the elite in the army, and in a particular area we know that there were many chariots being repaired. Some other workshops that we find immediately in the palace vicinity would perhaps be ivory workshops where they were making ivory that was inset into furnitures. So we can see that the palace films both a religious function, certainly a status function. This is where the elite gathered. Probably a military function in that all the members of the army were gathered there and distributed from there, but an economic function as well. So what I'm going to get you to do is you're going to watch the PowerPoint that I sent you all and take notes on it. And then I'm going to ask you to do a practice question. Your teacher will write it on the board. You'll know what it is. And you'll do it as a 5 mark. Hopefully that's enough that you've got, that you'll be able to write on any question that's to do with the palaces themselves. Remember, if you ever get to discuss the palaces, you want to use that kind of language. That they use cyclopean walls. And inside the walls, which were very thick, sometimes there was corbelling, which was that kind of layered roofs that came up. That they used bastions, that they used, there was ashlar masonry, and you know that term ashlar masonry. Ashlar masonry was certainly associated with the megarons as well. So they're the kind of terminologies that you've got to think about in terms of their architecture, also in terms of their engineering, that as well as the fact that they could build cyclopean walls, which is fairly amazing. That in at least 3 of the sites, Tiryns, Mycenae and Athens, we've got evidence that they had created engineering works that created a secret access point to water that would support the city during a siege. Finally, in terms of engineering, we know in Mycenae a river was diverted because it was causing flooding in the lower area of the town outside the city walls, so that they used their engineering skills to actually re-divert the course of the river. And there was a large area in the north near Gla, G-L-A, in which they actually drained a lake and used it as a area that would sustain agriculture. Now, as this Mycenaean civilization collapsed, that the irrigation works that drained that lake started to back up, and the lake has returned. But that's another important evidence of Mycenaean engineering. Other things we have are roads. Throughout the Peloponnesian Peninsula, we have evidence of roads that were created during the Mycenaean era, including bridges that again show that kind of corbelling in terms of the spans of the bridge. And we believe, or there is evidence, that across the narrow isthmus, what a fabulous word to say, I'm going to stumble over it, Isthmus, the narrow isthmus near Corinth, that there was an attempt by the Mycenaeans to actually build a wall that was like a defense mechanism. The other thing you need to think about when you come to the citadels is that the road systems were all centered on the citadels. So what we have is that the citadels are like a center of a web of transportation networks. So we see the role of the citadel as an economic hub, as a religious hub, as a political hub, and of course as a defensive hub, and then finally as a transport hub. So if you get a question, you can look at all those issues in terms of the role of the citadel. Hopefully you now know everything you need to know about the citadels. I'm going to put this up on YouTube. Remember, you can go back and listen to these before an exam as a form of revision. So they'll be there for you forever. The really scary thing is that means other people may see me on YouTube, and I can be afraid. I can be very, very afraid. Have fun. Be good for your teacher. Do lots of work. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. I think my daughter's going to photobomb me again. Well, that's the cat. Goodbye, cat. Bye.